Good morning. I'm Robert Summercrest, and I think this is the first time that I've ever asked people to take a seat and begin the program, and actually immediately people did that. So we're actually starting a couple of minutes early. Welcome to Terry Third Thursday for this month. This is our monthly speaker series, an opportunity to connect with our alumni and the business community here in Atlanta. And if you haven't been to one of these before, I also want to welcome you to the TEAC, as we call it, the Terry Executive Education Center, which is our base in Atlanta and where we run our executive programs, including the Executive MBA. I want to begin by acknowledging our sponsors, and we've had some of the representatives of the sponsors kind of expected and not necessarily here, so let me see if I can get the names right. Our premier corporate sponsor is Bank of North Georgia, and they have several people with them today. I'm going to ask that they stand and be recognized, and if there's another Bank of North Georgia person who came in at the last minute, forgive me for not getting the name. Howard Blanton, Matthew Ricks, Judson Langley, Holly Bedinger, Blair McCabe, Elizabeth Dura, Billy Hilly, and Paige Collier. Welcome. Thank you. Deloitte is also a corporate sponsor. We appreciate their support. I don't believe we have anyone from Deloitte today. We do. All right. Well, thank you for your support. We also have two media sponsors, Public Broadcasting Atlanta, and we're expecting today Milton Clipper, Harriet Hoskins Aberhall, Linda Matoya, Jared Blass, and Rebecca White. Thank you for your support. And from the ABC, the Atlanta Business Chronicle, we're joined by Shelley Lewis and Susan White. We've got some more great topics coming up in this Terry Third Thursday speaker series. On July 17th, we're looking forward to having Ken Jackson here. Ken is the CFO of Shaw Enterprises, or Shaw Industries Group, and he has a very timely topic for us. His program will be titled Managing Successfully Through an Economic Downturn. August 21st, we'll be calling the dogs in as we welcome Sonny Seiler of Savannah. Sonny, as I think everyone in this room probably knows, is the owner of one of the world's most famous lines of bulldogs, the Georgia mascot. I think that's going to be a lot of fun, so I hope to see you there for Sonny Seiler. And then going on to September, we've got Louise Allen. She's the president of Ivan Allen Workspace, and she'll be discussing the challenges and privileges of running a fourth-generation family business. You can register for any of those programs online, or you can just talk to any of the Terry staff here in the room. Now I'm going to ask Lewis Brown to come up and introduce our speaker. Lewis is a 1985 graduate of Terry, and he's been serving on our alumni board since 2004. He's worked in the financial consulting for many years and now has his own financial advisory firm, LB Brown Financial Resources. Lewis and our speaker, Chris Welton, actually were contemporaries at UGA. They were both on campus in the early 1980s, and they were both student athletes who achieved distinction by being named to academic All-Americans. Also, they both played on championship teams. Lewis lettered in golf during his time in Athens, and he helped with the men's golf team as it won 2 SEC championships. He continues supporting the golf program at Georgia, and he's here this morning to introduce our speaker. So Lewis, can you come on up?
Thank you, Dean Summercrest. My championship team didn't have Herschel on it, so I feel like we actually accomplished a lot more. I'm just kidding. Our speaker this morning has been quite the achiever going back to his days in Athens. He's a 1981 graduate of the Terry College, where he majored in finance, and is a 1985 graduate of the law school. He was a defensive back on that 1980 national championship team that included Herschel, of course, that scrappy defense that bent but didn't break, and was a phenomenal experience, I'm sure. And I actually would like to hear about that, but today's his topic is of course something different. He began his professional career with the prestigious law firm King & Spalding here in Atlanta, specializing in real estate finance and development. Prior to the 1996 Centennial Olympic Games here in Atlanta, Chris left King & Spalding to work for the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games, where he was VP of Market Development. In that role, he was responsible for developing the corporate sponsorships and partnerships that made huge financial investments in those 96 games. Following the games that year, Chris formed Meridian Management, serving as president and CEO. Meridian was the exclusive marketing representative for the IOC. Meridian was responsible for the sale, negotiation, servicing, and support of IOC sponsors, and for creating and implementing the IOC strategic marketing plan. Chris now serves as Chief Executive of Helios Partners Inc. Helios is a global sports marketing firm with offices here in Atlanta, in this building as a matter of fact, London, Beijing, and Moscow. It specializes in representing cities bidding for sports events, corporate sponsorship consultation, sport property consultation, and sport property brand assessment. In short, Helios is the preeminent Olympic marketing firm in the world. When Chris is not dealing with Olympic matters and sports matters around the globe, he serves on the boards of the Georgia Community Foundation, Olympic Aid, and the Nature Conservancy of Georgia. We are privileged to have Chris here today to offer his unique insights into the convergence of sports, business, and politics at the Beijing Olympic Games. And with those games just weeks away, the timing could not be better. Please join me in welcoming Chris Welton.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having me. Lewis was, well, he had to put the dig in about Herschel and the fact that none of the rest of us did much except watch him. He was kind in two ways. Number one, he was kind to say, well, I guess you can say that the dean said that he was a contemporary of mine. He's actually much younger than I am. I graduated from law school when he graduated, when he was an undergraduate. So thanks for that. He was also very kind to point out that he tried for what, about 3 years to teach me the game of golf, and it was an absolute and dismal failure. It's to the point where I despise the game, and I may have, and that's why he's in the financial services business as opposed to still in the golf business. Anyway, now Lewis and I have been friends for a long time. Also, before we get started, I want to introduce you to one very special person to me, my partner Terrence Burns, who he was unable to be admitted to Georgia, so he's an Emory grad. But Terrence and I have worked together since my days back at ACOG, and we've had a long friendship and long career together. And Helios is really his company. I'm going to talk to you about it today and what we do. But Terrence started and founded Helios, and was kind enough to give me an opportunity to join Helios and become his partner. And so what you're going to hear about Helios today really was given birth by him, and I've been privileged enough to help it grow. And as you'll see, we're still a very young company, but we've grown extremely fast, faster than we can sometimes hang on to. But we're having a great time doing it. I also want to thank one other person who's not here, but without whom neither Terrence or I would be here today, and we wouldn't be in this business, and that's Billy Payne, who actually asked me in 1991 to leave the practice of law. For that alone, I will thank Billy Payne for the rest of my life, that I'm no longer practicing law. But as everybody knows, Billy brought the Olympics to Atlanta, gave me an opportunity to get into this business, get into the sports business, and I've been in it ever since and had a good time. And being a Georgia graduate, I would be remiss to talk about what we're doing in the world of sports without mentioning Billy. So that's not what you came to hear about. You came to hear about Beijing and about the Olympics. So what I'm going to talk today about is a little bit about Helios Partners, what we do, how we got started, who our clients are, how we try to assist companies and institutions benefit from the Olympic Games. I want to talk about Beijing itself and some of the opportunities and the challenges that exist in Beijing. Then I want to talk about the Olympics in the United States and some of the challenges facing the Olympics here, because the Olympics are perceived in the United States a bit differently from the way they're perceived elsewhere around the world, and I think it's caused a bit of a disconnect here and a challenge globally. And then obviously I don't want to leave without talking about some solutions and some ways forward that I think are necessary to help the Olympics regain the sort of stature that those of you who are old as me remember them once having. But before I do that, there's one bit of warning. I noticed a couple of things. I noticed my bankers are here, my financial advisors, one of my real estate partners is here. Who else? The guy who helped negotiate the lease for us upstairs. So we must be either doing really well and people want a lot of business, or people are waiting to collect some money from me as I leave. So I'm a little concerned about that. Also, there's one other person here, Ed Hula, who has a publication, electronic publication called Around the Rings, which is really the preeminent Olympic site and news publication, business news publication regarding the Olympics around the world. And I had planned to drop a few bombs this morning. I probably will still drop a few bombs, and I'll just trust Ed to be discreet with how he reports on what I say today. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. So, with that, what is Helios? Lewis described briefly what it is we do. These are our 6 main areas of business. It would take me 2 hours to describe in detail each one of them. I've been married 20 years. My wife still doesn't know what I do, so I won't try to bore you with all of these. But we do help sponsor companies, either companies who are sponsors who want to be sponsors, understand the Olympics and other sports properties and how they get value of it. We work with media companies, particularly ESPN, on helping them develop a more global strategy and take the tremendous brand value that they have in the U.S. and develop that around the world. We consult with sports properties as to how to construct their marketing programs, their sponsorship programs, and maintain their financial stability. We do brand assessment works. We actually did, and Terrence led this work when he was with me at my old company, Meridian. We did some groundbreaking work with the IOC where we convinced them that they needed to institute brand management principles with respect to this brand right here. They considered themselves a sports movement, really didn't control their own brand. They had hundreds of people around the world at any one time communicating on behalf of the Olympics, and everybody sort of thought they knew what that stood for, but nobody could describe it in a consistent manner, and particularly nobody could describe it in a way that was translatable to business entities so that they could align themselves with that brand, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. A big part of our business is bid city management. Our most recent success was representing the city of Sochi, Russia, which is a summer resort town which has won the right to host the Olympic Games. Again, that work was led by Terrence, and that relationship was developed. We actually have a lot of business in Russia, and Russia has been very good for us. There are a lot of opportunities over there, as many of you know. And then we have just recently begun an event marketing and activation service program, mostly because we found we were doing all this great strategic work for clients, and it would come time for them to activate, and we'd have to recommend another firm to do that business, and we wanted to stop losing that business. And as I said, we're only 3 years old, but this is an example of some of the clients that we either do represent now or have represented. If I do say so myself, it's a pretty attractive list of clients. It's unfortunate that the one company that we couldn't squeeze on here that is a relatively new client, we're representing them in the UK with respect to their sponsorship of the London Games, is Deloitte. So we do work for Deloitte as well. And that's developing into a very good relationship for us. Okay, politics and the Olympics. Sorry about this slide. It's a little bit busy, so don't strain your eyes trying to read it. But the point here is that politics have always been part of the Olympic Games. We all know about what the Nazis did with the Olympics to try to promote their way of life and show their supremacy and dominance over the rest of the world. We also know what Jesse Owens did at those games. We have a little internal joke about Jesse Owens. It's Terrence's favorite story to tell, and if anybody wants to stay for about an hour afterwards, he'll be happy to share that story with you. We know about the Arab terrorist attack on the Olympic Village in Munich in 1972. We know about the boycotts of 1980 and 1984. But the list goes on and on. In every Olympic Games, there have been activities of one sort or another that have been politically based. And the reason political organizations have latched on to the Olympic Games is because it is so high profile. It's the biggest event in the world. Everybody watches it. And if you want to get noticed, all you have to do is do something at the Olympic Games or use the Olympic Games as a platform. Frankly, these political organizations use the Olympics for sort of the same reason that sponsor organizations use the Olympics, because if you're associated with the Olympics, you get noticed and you get heard. I won't waste your time with all of these others, but these are just some few examples of ways that the Olympics have been used by political organizations. Now, when we talk to our clients, particularly our sponsor clients, we're very quick to tell them that while the Olympics is a huge event and there's tremendous opportunity with them, it's really only about two things when it comes to sponsorship. It's about an opportunity to showcase your products and services at the Games and provide hospitality to your clients so that they can see how you're operating at the Olympic Games, how you're helping the world's biggest, most complex event manage itself. And that's particularly important for technology companies who are helping put on the Games, other companies who are actually have a role in conducting the Games. It's also important for consumer products organizations like Coca-Cola who merely entertain their clients there, but want to give them an opportunity that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So that's thing number one that Olympic sponsorship is about. Thing number two, or opportunity number two, and this is the most important one, is the ability for a brand to align itself with the Olympic brand, and thereby try to get transference of the Olympic values onto your brand. And that can either be to reinforce values that already exist with your brand or to try to change perceptions that consumers or your customers have about your brand. It's nothing more than that. There's no media associated with Olympic sponsorship. Unlike most other sports properties, you don't get any television time. You don't get boards in the venues. We have completely clean venues. So when you invest what is now close to $100 million over a 4-year period, you're basically buying some intellectual property rights and some rights to buy tickets and rooms. So when we're out there selling Olympic sponsorship, when we were on the other side, or now when we're representing sponsors, we need to make sure that they understand that. This is a huge investment, and it's really just the investment that they make to buy these rights is really just the cost of entry, because there are tremendous costs then in leverage the investment. But why China in particular? Why is that of particular interest to sponsors? It's 1.3 billion people. It's the biggest market in the world, and it's certainly the biggest untapped market in the world. For China, these Olympics are very special. This is their national coming out party, literally. This is the first huge event where the eyes of the world will be on them, so it's of particular importance to them. From the Chinese perspective, and I don't consider myself an expert on China or how Chinese people look at things, but I do know enough to know that they look at things a lot differently from the way we look at it. And part of that is just cultural. Part of that has to do with their history over the last 200 years. But for whatever reason, for everyone in the country, this is a great honor for them to host the Games, and it will be a great honor for them to have staged what they hope will be the best Games ever. That's a little bit of a challenge to get into, but how you judge the best Games ever. But that's their goal. You know, there's a saying that I have up here that a Chinese saying that says, "In your home, you show the best," and that's the way they feel when people are coming to China. They want to put on their best. They also think of things, unlike us, they think of things in the collective. In China, for the lowliest peasant out in the field, if China puts on great Games, that peasant will take great pride. It's not like here in the United States where when we had good Games in Atlanta, some guy in Chicago felt a sense of pride and joy. It doesn't work that way here. We're much more about individual achievement and individual accomplishment. But for China, if any Chinese or if the Chinese people do well, the entire nation is going to get great joy out of that. So, and take great pride in that. And that's something that we have to get our mind around. That's why it's so important to them. And if you know, when people think about China now and they say, well, they're a communist government, they're actually probably if you look at it, they're probably more fascist than they are communist. But they consider themselves to be more free today than they have ever been in 200 years. We look at them and we say, how can these people live under this oppressive regime? But they actually do have pride in their government now, the progress that they have made. If you go back to the last century, they had emperors who were despots. Then you had the Western powers come and occupy their country. Then they were invaded by the Japanese. Then they had the Maoist communist government controlling them. So they really do have more freedom today, despite all of the human rights abuses and that sort of thing, than they have ever had. And they are happy to evolve over a long period of time. They don't need to sign a Declaration of Independence and throw their government out tomorrow. As long as they're continuing to make progress, they feel like they are moving in the right direction. So you have to keep that as mind. And then finally, why do sponsors in particular sponsor the Olympic Games, or why are they interested in China? It's because of the control of government, because of the big government role government plays in all activities in China. Government support is essential to any business activity. So many sponsors are sponsoring to show support for these games as a way of showing support for the government, in turn to get business out of the government, or to get support for business activities. We have one client who we actually cold called. It was actually Terrence and another partner we had at the time who cold called a company called BHP Billiton, which is a mining company. It's an Anglo-Australian mining company. Mining had never been a product category that was considered one appropriate for sponsorship, but they need mining concessions in China. So Terrence went to them and said, for $20 million, you can become a second-tier sponsor of the Olympic Games in Beijing, curry great favor with the government, and that will help you acquire and maintain these mining concessions. A little more complex than that, but I'm trying to go fast here. And they bought it. So for $20 million, which is a drop in the bucket for this multi-billion-dollar company over a 4 or 5 year period, they are the official mining company of the Olympic Games. We call them the official hole in the ground, but it's the sponsorship has been extremely successful for them. So when you think of sponsorship, you think of Coca-Cola, you think of McDonald's, you think of Nike, but sponsorship can work for a variety of different types of companies. In China in particular, it's because of the necessity for government support. It'll be the same with the Sochi Games in Russia. There'll be a little of that in London because the government is much more pervasive than it is here. So again, another reason for supporting the games. The challenges that come with that opportunity. The challenges are higher and more acute in China than they are elsewhere. Again, some of these activist organizations are really using China as a way to get their point across. And the three issues that have really gotten most of the attention are Darfur in the Sudan because of the Chinese government's support for the Sudanese government. And I don't know how much you know about what's going on there, but it's basically that the Arab population in the north is trying to take over farmland from the black African population in the south because of a drought. The Chinese government is supporting the Arab-controlled Sudanese government in Khartoum, and people are protesting that, and rightfully so. I don't like the fact that they're using the Olympics to do that, but it's actually a good cause. The cause of Tibet. China invaded Tibet in 1947 and has seen it as a province since then. A lot of people think Tibet ought to be independent, so they're using these games as a way of making that point. And then human rights generally in China. And as I mentioned, the Chinese government is an oppressive government, but it is evolving. Every time we go there, we see progress. And the Chinese people definitely see progress. Now, there's still a tremendous amount of oppression. The latest issue is that BOCOG, the organizing committee, and the Beijing government have announced that they will not allow television crews to operate in Tiananmen Square because they're worried about protests going on there and being broadcast to the rest of the world. So these issues are being dealt with every day. Frankly, the Chinese are not adept at handling these sort of issues. They're pretty clumsy at it. They think that they can just clamp down on people and stop the activity, and they can't with most of these Western news organizations because they'll hear about it. So, what other challenges are facing the Olympic movement? And this goes actually beyond just Beijing. But the Olympics is facing an increasingly competitive landscape in the sports marketing world and in the entertainment world for sponsor dollars, for consumer interest, for people's leisure time and attention. And frankly, the Olympics is not evolving as quickly and as well as many other sports and entertainment properties. Frankly, the IOC, the USOC, and the other Olympic bodies are not embracing new technology and new media as fast as they should or as quickly as other properties. Younger viewers are consuming less TV. The Olympics is still very TV-centric, and the Olympics runs the risk of losing relevance, and I'll give you a few reasons for that in a minute. Don't kill yourself looking at this chart. What this chart tells you is that 37% of ad spend is on television right now versus all of the other media, TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, cinema, and digital. But if you look at young people under 18 and age 18 to 35, they are actually consuming much more digital media than they are television media. So if you're trying to catch a younger audience and become relevant to a younger audience, you have to become less television-centric and much more digital-centric. Now, digital is a big word and a big category, and it means a lot of different things. But the bottom line is the old broadcast model is not going to work any longer, and that has to change. And because of the way television and media contracts are done in the Olympics, where they're done 10, 12 years in advance sometime, at least 5 or 6 years in advance, those things are not changing at the rate that they need to. And then finally, some of these political and competitive challenges are exacerbated just by the size of the Olympic movement. There are over 200 countries. There are 27 some sports in the Olympic movement. Many of those sports are, frankly, historical anachronisms. Who in here knows what modern pentathlon is? Okay, we've got a couple. I knew you would. But not very many people. How many people are fencing fans? How many people are badminton fans? You like modern pentathlon and fencing? Okay. Did you really? Okay. I'll ask you, it's kind of like getting into sports marketing. I want to know how you did that. What led you to that? We'll talk later. Well, good. And then anyway, you threw me off there. I've never met a modern pentathlete. And then broadcast revenue represents almost 50% of the total revenue to the Olympic movement, and that's something that will change. It has to change, but the mechanism and the structure isn't in place right now to make it change quickly. So those are just a few challenges that are facing the movement. All right, now let me move on sort of to what the Olympic brand is. As I mentioned earlier, what we tell our sponsors in dealing with all of these challenges and all these issues is focus on the values of the movement. Don't get caught up in Darfur. Don't get caught up in Tibet. Don't get caught up in human rights. Focus on the positive values of the Olympics. And I've put up here on the screen the one slide from about a 4-hour presentation on the Olympic brand. As I mentioned, Terrence led work that we did for the IOC where we tried to understand the Olympic brand, define the Olympic brand, and then put in place a brand management plan for the IOC that would help them control this brand going forward. And what we found was that the attributes, and we've got them broken down into Tier 1 and Tier 2, and we could explain to you why we did that, but I won't right now. But these are the words that kept coming back from people, unaided. These are actually words that came from their mouths when we said, what does the Olympics mean to you? And up here in Tier 1, we have things like friendship, multicultural, of course, striving, peaceful, participation, the global, fair competition. I don't think any of you would argue with these words and say that they don't relate to the Olympics. And down here you have honorable, dignified, powerful, inspirational, equality, patriotic, respectful. All very good, powerful, positive words that most brands would want to be associated with. But the thing that you see about those words, let me go back to them one more time. The interesting thing about this, we typically pose this as a question, but I won't in the interest of time. The interesting thing about this is that most of these either don't apply to sports or are not exclusively applicable to sports. The Olympics is much more than about sport, and that's why as a sponsorship property, as a sponsorship tool, it is so effective. It applies to everyone, whether you're a sportsman, whether you're a sportswoman or not. The Olympic Games mean something to you. We have story after story from focus groups, from consumers we've talked to about what the Olympics means to them. And everybody appreciates the Olympic Games because these values are what it's about, are about what it takes to lead a successful life. And when you're on your deathbed and you look back, if you can say, I had these characteristics, then you'll consider yourself to have led a successful life. So that this brand and this event has a unique set of characteristics where, yes, it's about competition. Yes, it's about the struggle for success. And it's about being the best. It's the best athletes in the world competing to be the best athlete in the world in their particular discipline. But it's also a celebration of community. And I'm talking about the world community here. It's every country in the world, every nationality, every ethnicity, both genders. It embodies very positive values that apply to everybody in the world. And what that gives you is a very powerful, emotive brand that companies want to be associated with. And that's why they sponsored the Olympics. I want to show you here hold on, let me back up first and just introduce this. Coming out of this brand work that we did, we commissioned, using TBWHI Day at their LA office, a set of spots that would demonstrate these values. And these were ads that were run by the IOC everywhere in the world leading up to the Sydney Games, everywhere in the world except the United States. And I'll talk about the reason for that in a minute. But that try to put in a 60 or 30-second spot all of these attributes that we were talking about and help people visualize what these Olympic values are and what they mean. So with that, I'm going to run you 3 spots, and I'll just run it straight through, and then I'll stop again and talk about them. Is the volume up on these spots, do we think? Because I didn't hear it there, but.
Strength is measured in pounds. Speed is measured in seconds. Courage? You can't measure courage.
Can you hear that okay? All right. I don't see anybody crying, so it must not have been that effective.
You are my adversary, but you are not my enemy. For your resistance gives me strength. Your will gives me courage. Your spirit ennobles me. And though I aim to defeat you, should I succeed, I will not humiliate you. Instead, I will honor you. For without you, I am a lesser man.
All right. Again, are you understanding how these sort of reflect those Olympic values that we talked about before? Here's the final one, which really you'll see Olympic athletes in here and you'll see athletes, but this spot talks about those values really in a non-sporting context.
When you smile, I smile. That's the deal. I will not walk past you and not look you in the eyes and not acknowledge you. Instead, we will pass each other and say hello. Not with our words, for they are not the same, but with our faces. I meet you and I see there is good in your eyes. there's passion in your heart, and there's a friendly hello in your smile. And for the first time, we can relate and appreciate each other. That's all it takes. That's where it starts. Because I know that you will smile, and I will smile, and all the rest is easy.
The interesting thing about those spots, which we did in '99 and they ran in 2000, is that they're reflective of a principle from the Olympic Charter that was written well over 100 years ago. What you see on the screen here was the principle of the Olympic Charter that was written in 1894. And I won't read it to you, but take a second and read it for yourself, because it's very important. It is nowhere in there do you see anything about winning or about dominating your opponent or about humiliating your opponent. What you see is concepts of mutual understanding, spirit of friendship, solidarity, fair play, building a peaceful and better world, no discrimination, etc. That was written well over 100 years ago, and that's still the foundation of the Olympic movement, and that's where the Olympic movement derives its strength from. This is also from the Olympic Charter, and when I show you the two spots that I'm going to show you in a minute, what you're going to say is, what happened to this? What happened to this theory that the most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win but to take part? Just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered but to have fought well. Again, underlying principle of the Olympic movement. Now, in the United States, we've been fed a different dish. We've been fed, frankly, that the Olympic Games is about the United States beating the hell out of the rest of the world. And that's why we should watch it, and that's how it gets promoted to us, and that's how the broadcast is played to us. It's promoted when it's promoted. That's a whole other topic, is how the Olympic Games is promoted in the United States. There's really no Olympic content except for the 6 weeks. I think NBC has now started promoting the games, but it's very thin, it's very weak, and I'm going to show you how they do it and how they try to get you interested in watching the Olympic Games, and hopefully we can hear these too. And in fairness, this is just two examples, and then they're the two worst examples, or most egregious examples, but it's my speech, so I put them in there. Here we go. And Ed, I'm probably committing. Sorry.
Standing up there, I'm hearing the national anthem play.
The gold medal around your neck.
I just remember standing there and thinking, I don't want this moment to end.
I mean, there really isn't anything like it.
I was really living out exactly what I had dreamed. I remember my coach yelling to me, Olympic champion.
Michael Phelps, so many.
Gymnastics. Laura Wilkinson, diving. My coach just kept saying, we did it, we did it. Oh, we did it, the big it.
One more.
I will never forget being on the podium.
All three flags of the national anthem.
So overcome with emotion, I completely forgot the words.
You want to cry, but at the same time, you're excited.
It's just such a special moment. No one can take that from me. Something that I dreamed about when I was 6 years old. Carrie Walsh, beach volleyball.
Jeremy Warner, track and field.
Natalie Coughlin, swimming.
It's an honor to wear the USA uniform.
Again, I'll just throw this back up on the screen. Read that and see if what you just saw reflects this. I don't know if it does to you, May. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with patriotism. And I'm not saying that anybody who knows me knows I'm very competitive. Anybody who played football with me, even Herschel, who I tried to tackle once or twice, anybody who's dealt with me in business, anybody who watched me sitting in the stands as my son was making his way through the state baseball playoffs, knows I'm as competitive as anybody. But it's not just about winning. And for the Olympics to get back to the status that it once held, it's got to get back to the fundamental principles about friendship, fair play, mutual respect for everyone around the world. And I think we miss a lot in the United States by the way the Olympics is given to us. Now, sponsors have begun, to their credit, sponsors have begun to recognize, some of them, not all of them, but some sponsors have begun to recognize where the real value of the Olympics is and what's appealing. You know, I talk about a lot about my two-person focus group that I have, my 16-year-old son and my 13-year-old daughter, and what's of interest to them. And they are both athletes, and they are both very competitive. But the way the Olympics is portrayed to them in the United States right now is not of interest to them. They don't want to see, they don't get excited about just American athletes beating some unnamed athlete from some unnamed place somewhere in the world. They get excited about the multicultural aspect. They get excited about learning about other cultures. They get excited about the story of a guy from some place that they either didn't know existed or they know existed and wanted to know more about. They like the fact, I mean, they can go to the NBA, they can go to the NFL. You know, they can save their hatred for Georgia, Florida weekend. They don't need it in the Olympics, and they're not interested in it. And so if the Olympic Games wants to recapture that youth demographic, if they want to appeal to that youth demographic, they've got to do two principal things. One is to communicate to them in the way that they consume things, particularly sport, and that's not necessarily through television, that's through a lot of different media, and they got to do it in a way that's relevant to them. It's not just about dominating people, it's about the world coming together. Visa has started to do a very good job of that. Coca-Cola has always done a pretty good job of that and continues to do a better job of it. And we were going to run some spots, but I won't because in the interest of time. But as I said, the whole world is going to come together to watch these games on August 8th. And what I would ask you to do is to kind of look past what is being shoved down your throat on the broadcast, and try to look beneath the American rhetoric and look at what the Olympic Games is really about. Try to find stories about athletes from other places in the world. Try to find stories about people who struggle for years and years and years to be able to compete in sports like modern pentathlon or fencing, and get to the pinnacle of their competition, which is the Olympic Games, and get to have that experience. And I'll close by saying, just notice one thing that most of you probably are already aware of, because most people know this, but it's a very important symbolic moment. And it starts with opening ceremonies, and you'll all remember at opening ceremonies, the teams march in, or the countries march in, and they march in a very formal fashion, and there's somebody that carries the flag at the front of the team, and they are little armies walking in. They're little armies going in there to compete for their team. What happens at closing ceremonies? How do they come in closing ceremonies? Anybody remember? Everybody's together, and you might have an American athlete wearing a Botswanan warm-up suit with a Japanese athlete up on his shoulders. You might have the flags are all mixed up, the uniforms are all mixed up. It's one world, and the symbolism there is that that's what happens during the games. You go from these armies to a polyglot, and that's what is not being expressed here, other than when they mention it at the closing ceremony. So anyway, with that, I'll finish. And sorry about the technical glitch, but hopefully you enjoyed that and got something out of it. And I'm, like I said, our office is right upstairs. If we have time for questions right now, I'll be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll be happy to stay around and answer any questions that you have, because I don't have far to go.
We do have time for a few questions, but by now you've seen the problems with sound. We are recording this, so if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you so that we can everyone can hear you.
Don't send this to Dick Ebersol, please. Or maybe you should. Actually send it. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Right, come on over there.
Two questions, actually. Is that all right? First of all, what are the limitations on the use of the rings for the sponsors and for anybody else? The second is, what about the Paralympics?
how long do you have for me to discuss the limitation on use of the rings by the sponsors? There are a lot of limitations. Every use of the rings by the sponsors has to be approved by the IOC. That's one of the jobs we did when I had the marketing agency that worked for the IOC. Was we approved sponsor ads to make sure that the intellectual property was used correctly, that they were used in a format that was. It was a balancing act. When someone has paid you $75 million for the right to use the rings, and then you say, no, you can't use them in that format that your creative agency comes up with, it creates a bit of a tension. So we tried to find a balance between allowing creativity and fairly liberal use of the mark, but trying to make sure that it was in keeping with these brand values as well. We got, not to offend anyone here from McDonald's, but every year we would get an ad from McDonald's, which was 5 hamburgers in the shape of the rings. And every year we would send it back. So and say no, try again. And what we tried to do was say, it was not say no, but say, look, it's going to be much more effective and it's going to appeal to your consumers and your audience much better if you will actually demonstrate how your sponsorship is helping to support these games, how the sponsorship is supporting this brand, and how you are linking how your brand is linked to these brand values. Now, you know, there's a lot of there are issues with McDonald's alone being a sponsor, and what their product is and how what their customer base is and how they serve it and that sort of thing. So, but you know, having said that, the real value for them is to take these values of the Olympic movement and apply it to their brand. So what we always tried to do, and what I think the IOC still tries to do, is to say it's going to be more valuable to you if you use it in a way that associates with the Olympic brand, as opposed to just slapping the rings on a product, on a Coke can, or 5 hamburgers in the shape of the rings. With respect to the Paralympics take place 3 weeks after the games, the Olympic Games themselves. To be quite honest with you, they're a bit of a stepchild. It is required of the organizing committee to host the Olympic Games, but the Olympic Games get very little coverage. There's no guaranteed television coverage of the games. The broadcasters who broadcast the Olympic Games have the right to broadcast the Paralympic Games, but rarely do. We have some theories on that as well. We've done some work for the International Paralympic Committee on defining their brand, which incorporates many of the Olympic values, but also creates a distinction between the Olympic brand and the Paralympic brand. The Paralympics can't compete with the Olympics on the basis of being the pinnacle of sport. It's about something else. It's about overcoming these disabilities that people have and still being able to compete, and helping people understand that disabled people have the same sort of competitive instincts and the same drive, and sometimes even more so than Olympic athletes have. But it is not the Olympic Games in a sporting sense, and it's never going to be. So they have to accept that and market themselves in a way that appeals to that demonstrates what they really are. I'm not sure that answered your question completely, but sure. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Has the IOC done anything to address the view of the Olympics in the United States, and especially with the younger generation? She had touched on that.
The IOC recognizes the problem. The challenge that they have is that in the United States, the United States Olympic Committee is extremely strong. In fact, there's a federal law called the Amateur Sports Act, which grants all intellectual property rights, all Olympic intellectual property rights to the U.S. Olympic Committee. There is a highly dysfunctional relationship between the IOC and the USOC, to the point where they're in paralysis. So the IOC would like to address the problem. The USOC claims they would like to address the problem, but has no idea how to go about it. And so nothing is being done. The other issue you have is that the broadcast agreements are so strong in favor of the broadcaster. For instance, not only does the IOC have no control over how the games are presented in the United States, NBC doesn't even have to doesn't even have to run the games. All NBC has to do is write a check. And then the IOC sits back and says, okay, you decide how you present the games in the United States. You decide what sports you cover. You decide how you promote it. You decide who the talent is and what the commentary is and how much sport you play versus how much sport you run versus how many stories about the guy whose dog died last week, yet he still found the courage to get up there and compete and win the gold medal and raise those 3 flags up there and pound his chest and talk about how he beat the hell out of the rest of the world. So yes, the IOC understands the issue. The IOC really understands it has a problem. It will take a radical shift, though, in the relationship between the IOC and the USOC, the relationship with the broadcaster, and a lot of other entities that are very smart people and know how to make the games relevant. This is getting to be a long answer, but one of the challenges you have also is the program itself, because many of the sports are not that appealing to youth market. But the way the IOC is structured, there are 115 members of the IOC. It takes a majority vote, at least a majority vote, to change a sport, and it's got to go through the executive board and then the General Assembly. And when you've got now I don't want to pick on modern pentathlon, but let's just say that someone would get the crazy idea of wanting to eliminate modern pentathlon from the program and replace it with another sport that seems to have more appeal to the younger generation. When you've got the president of the Modern Pentathlon Federation sitting on the IOC, and when he's there more as a representative of modern pentathlon than he has representing the interests of the IOC, and he's got colleagues who are representing similar sports, and they say, well, if modern pentathlon goes out, I go out, and I'm next on the cutting board. It's really, really hard to effectuate this change. So there's got to be some changes to the product itself, which is the program, what sports are on the program. There's got to be a change in the relationship between the IOC and the USOC. There's got to be a change in the broadcast strategy or media strategy, I should call it. And people are going to want to be able to choose how they consume and what they consume from the Olympic Games, as opposed to it being dictated to them, and they're being told to watch on primetime television at this time, on this channel, and in this format, and you're going to have to listen to Bob Costas, who will drive you crazy, and so others. Yes, sir.
What you were just talking about with being on 8 o'clock with Bob Costas, with the ability of the internet, obviously, and data streaming as it is there going to be ability for us to be watching BBC or something out of Australia, etc., at the times that we want, live via the internet through some of the other broadcasters internationally?
No, there's now the technology that will block that streaming from the other broadcasters. NBC owns all broadcast rights in the United States, so if NBC doesn't let something come in here, you're not going to be able to watch it. What NBC is trying to do is it's trying to create digital partnerships with other entities. It's struck an agreement with Microsoft, but it just did that 3 months ago. It's way late. It's way too late to promote it. It's way too late to fully get it integrated to their broadcast. And so you will have the opportunity to see some streaming through some outlets that are provided by NBC, but no, you're not going to be able to get moving images. You can get obviously results. You can get some audio, but you're not going to be able to actually watch the competition on BBC or Channel 9 in Australia, etc. Just some things will be posted on YouTube, but NBC will probably crack down on that. There are rules about when highlights can be shown and that sort of thing, and there's a bit of a delay period, because you're going to have Olympic coverage on SportsCenter, you're going to have Olympic coverage on other sporting news, but it's going to be delayed and it's not going to be live, and they're going to, let's say that they've actually moved around some of the more popular, at least popular in the U.S. sports, say swimming. They've moved swimming finals to, 9 o'clock in the morning, Ed, something like that, in order to accommodate U.S. primetime television. But other events that are happening in the middle of the night, there's going to be an embargo on highlights until they actually run on NBC. So it's going to be a challenge. I mean, everybody's going to know what happened, which is going to take away some of the drama because you can get the results. But if you actually want to watch the competition, you're sort of at the mercy of NBC.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a chance there will be an Olympics in the Middle East?
Well, yeah, Jim asked if there was any chance that there would be Olympics in the Middle East. We currently represent Doha, Qatar, which bid for the 2016 games, who got, this is actually a very complex and politically charged question, so I answer it as delicately as I can. The way the bid process works is you go through an initial phase of technical analysis, and then the IOC comes back and says, all right, of the 7, 8, 9 cities that we're bidding, this many meet the technical standards and can go on to through the full bid process and ultimately be voted on by the IOC. Doha did not make that cut. It came in third in the technical standings. It tied with Chicago. And when I say we represent these cities, what we did for Doha was actually write their application, do their questionnaire, and then the IOC goes back and ranks them. And Doha tied for third in technical ranking with Chicago, Illinois. And not to beat our own drum, but the fact that we could make Doha, Qatar look as good as Chicago, Illinois was frankly quite an achievement. Nonetheless, the IOC cut them, saying that the date of the games, which was going to be late October, was outside of the recommended period. Now, Doha was under the impression that the IOC would accept the period. I'll just leave it at that. They were under the impression that the period that Doha proposed was acceptable. The IOC came back in the end and said it wasn't acceptable. Having said all of that, I think there's a very good chance Doha will go forward and try again in 2020. There's a chance that Dubai could go forward. But there is a big issue with timing because it's so hot in August and the preferred period is August. You can't have the Olympic Games in August in those parts of the world. It's just, Terrence has spent a lot of time down there, and it's tough walking from building to building, so you can't have it. Which means October, which means there's a big impact on television or on broadcasting, particularly in the U.S., because it competes with, it's such a busy time of year for sport in the U.S. I mean, if anybody sitting here has to choose between the George Auburn game and the men's 100-meter finals, I know where you're going to go. So that's an issue, but it's got to happen. The IOC talks about universality, globalism, and you still see the Northern Hemisphere, Europe, the Americas, and the principal cities in Asia, and that's all we've ever had. There's never been, the only Southern Hemisphere games have been in Australia. There's never been a game in the developing world. Although, having just been in Greece a couple weeks ago, you could probably include them. But, so anyway, that's the answer to the question. There was one more back there, and that I'd be happy to take just real quickly. Sorry, didn't mean, I know it's your meeting.
Mike's not on.
Yeah, Mike's not on. Could you?
Does the Chinese government will try to have on the Olympics in terms of what being broadcast overseas, in terms of blacking it out?
Well, of the sporting events themselves, they'll pretty much give absolute freedom to every bit of sport competition will be broadcast or will be covered, and the host broadcast facility will put the feed out, and then that can be picked up by whatever broadcaster wants to pick it up and put its commentary over it. In terms of what happens outside of the field of play, I'm quite sure the Chinese government is going to exercise as much control as they possibly can. And they're going to do that in two ways. Number one, they're going to try to, like I said, they're going to try to limit or prohibit cameras from being in Tiananmen Square, because that's the central place where most protests occur. if there are protests in the stands, if there are people hanging banners, they'll rip them out. I mean, there are IOC regulations and Olympic regulations against protests within the arena, and I would call that legitimate because it takes away from the sports competition. Outside the arenas, outside the actual Olympic venues, I'm sure they will try to tamp down at whatever kind of controversial protest there is. They will also bring in as many what I would call friendly people as possible to fill up those areas and express more positive views of the Chinese government, and they have 1.3 million people to do that with, so or billion people to do that with. So it's fairly obvious that they'll try to exercise a lot of control, and all we can hope is that they develop the tact to manage it in a way that's appropriate.
Okay.
You want this?
Chris, no, thanks very much for sharing your views on the Olympics with us. They're insightful. I want to present you with a token of our appreciation, this glass sculpture by local artist Paul Benzunas.
Oh, thank you very much.
And for our